Welcome to the Sake Brewers Association of North America first webinar, our first webinar ever. My name is Bernie Baskin. I am the Executive Director of the Sake Brewers Association of North America. We're the only trade association for the sake industry outside of Japan. And today we are joined by Byron Stitham, the head brewer of Proper Sake in Nashville, Tennessee. And we're joined by Andrew Santafonte, the head brewer of North American Sake Brewery in Charlottesville, Virginia. And welcome to the program, guys.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So we have quite a few people on today, which is really exciting. This is our first webinar ever. We're still working out some of the kinks, but we're really excited that everybody could be here today. So thanks for taking some time out of your days to join us. I want to just give you kind of a brief overview of what the Sake Brewers Association is all about, and then we'll jump into this conversation between Byron and Andrew. So the Sake Brewers Association is about 6 months old. Like I said, we're the only trade association for the sake industry outside of Japan, and we really have three main goals: consumer education, industry education, data collection, networking, and industry development. And then the third is then government relations. We're trying to improve the industry at the highest levels. As part of our consumer education, as well as industry education componentry, we decided to launch this webinar series, which may turn into a bit of a podcast series as well. We'll see how that goes. But the reason was to kind of get everybody talking and to kind of get this idea of sake brewers here in North America out there to the world, to start a dialogue between different brewers and to start a dialogue between the larger sake community. We invited Andrew and Byron. We're good friends with both of these guys, and we wanted to understand what makes them tick. So with that, I want to kind of start with Byron. You moved to Nashville over a decade ago to study business, but you ended up getting pretty deeply involved in the culinary and fermentation scenes there. When did you discover sake? How did you get interested in that sake world?
Yeah, so I moved to Tennessee to go to Belmont to study music business, which was kind of a strange departure to get to sake, but I've always been pretty culinarily minded. And so naturally, my first job out of college was not in the music business. It was at a restaurant where I actually learned how to enjoy working and appreciating fermentation and culinary sciences. I appreciate having a business background, especially now, at least some sort of acumen. But yeah, ultimately, I've been working on being better in the kitchen, being better at fermenting, and certainly hospitality. And I think that being a sake brewer gets to tie all that together, especially when you have your own space with which to do that. Sake for me especially, I think resonated pretty early on because it's so distinctive to most of the beverages that are available in the States. But that said, I think it is also equally approachable, especially once people get beyond, the normal paradigm of hot commodity sake. So of course, I'm sure we'll get into this further, but that's definitely part of the mission.
Okay. And Andrew, kind of turning to you briefly, you had a pretty successful career in marketing before discovering sake. How did you first become interested in sake? What led you down that path that you're currently on?
Yeah, so sake for me kind of came into my life like a storm. I used to work for a company called Semester at Sea. I was director of brand strategy there. So I was really deep into like kind of the marketing world, a lot of design and web and video. And that job gave me the opportunity to actually get onto the ship and sail. So Semester at Sea is a study abroad program that takes place on the ship that sails around the world. And it takes students to different locations, different countries, to really expose them to a lot of different culture, and to really open up their minds in terms of global perspective. And I had the opportunity to do that. So I got to get on a ship and for 4 months, travel to over 15 countries, literally circumnavigating the globe. And that's when I went to Japan for the first time. And that's when I discovered sake. And it was a beverage that kind of blew my mind because I had really, pretty standard experiences with sake. I had gone to, sushi restaurants and had the, hot version of it. But it wasn't until I was actually in Japan that I had cold sake, that I had the opportunity to try different sakes from different brewers in different regions and start to really open my mind up to kind of the depth of what it is. And, came back to the States with kind of this passion and just started finding different bottles that I could get my hands on and drinking different bottles of sake. To really try to get my mind wrapped around it, get my palate wrapped around it. And then one fateful night after maybe a couple bottles of sake, I looked at it and just wondered if it was something that I could actually try to brew. I had done some home brewing of beer, really loved that. And this seemed like a really interesting challenge. And so for me, it was like this crazy rabbit hole of kind of trying to understand it, looking for resources around it, and realizing that there was like really high level information, but when you really got down to it and you were trying to kind of do it yourself, there wasn't a ton out there. And that spurred something in me, I think that was really interesting, which was just kind of like, I got to figure this out. I really want to understand this deeper. And so, yeah, my background really is this kind of like basement home brewer where I had a little incubation chamber for my koji that I was trying to understand and work through, and small fermentation buckets in the coldest part of my basement. And from there, it kind of just evolved into a pretty hardcore hobby that then turned into a business. And so, yeah, I mean, it was all these kind of pieces that started to fit together and ended up just kind of taking my life by storm in a really, really great way.
Did you find that as well, Byron? Did it kind of hit you all at once, or was it really kind of a slow process? Did you do home brewing? How did you sort of find it?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the first time that I attempted to brew it was the first time I realized truly how distinctive it is, but also how difficult it is. And I wouldn't want to minimize other brews and ferments, but having a background in culinary and fermentation, there was something that set this one apart. And actually getting into that process really helped explain why it was so special on the back end. And from there, starting to explore the different varietals, the different styles, the different means to reaching those ends, that became more than a hobby almost immediately. So that was about a decade ago. And really, once I first tasted Yamahai and Kimoto and any of your kind of pre-modern varietals, really I started to understand just how wide the spectrum was for the beverage and just how much I think Americans were kind of missing the point on sake. So figuring that part out, and then coming up with some talking points as to why this would be a valid endeavor, especially just for myself, took another 7 years. But here we are. It's too late to turn back.
Yeah, for me, koji is kind of what stopped me in my tracks. Like, I was interested in sake. I'd made a hobby of drinking bottles, and I was excited for this kind of homebrew experiment. But really, that after that first 24 hours, I had it up in this kind of attic area that was nice and warm. And I remember just pulling it out and just taking a deep smell of this aroma that I had never experienced before. And it, like I said, stopped me. I was like, this is something so special. It's so unique. And how have I not had this experience before? And, my first batch of koji was probably not very good, but it spurred something in me that I thought was so interesting. And the more I started reading about koji, not only in sake, but in other culinary aspects like misos and soy sauce, and I realized that, like, I've had koji before. You know, this is something that's not necessarily that insanely foreign. It's just cool. And I think that's what kind of, like, I love, Byron, to hear more about, like, where you see opportunity in that culinary aspect, because for me, like, we're just kind of starting in Charlottesville a little bit of this kind of culinary movement. But I've talked to quite a few chefs in Richmond who are really interested in koji and kind of doing really funky and cool different experiments with koji. And I think that's what's awesome about sake, is it's part of all these other worlds where it's like, it is its own extremely unique and deep beverage, like, just by itself. But when you start talking about pairing food and you start talking about koji as an ingredient and how it links with all these other kind of culinary things, I think it's awesome.
Yeah, and to further elaborate on the magic of koji, I mean, certainly the first batches I made were abysmal by brewing standards, but even still, it's totally a miracle when you see it and taste it for the first time. And then, of course, when you realize some of the inner workings of it, it really is a miracle fermenter. Just the way that each grain of rice is its own ecosystem, that still blows my mind. And then, of course, all of the culinary applications, which are so interesting and, of course, are becoming more and more prevalent. So the door has only begun to be opened there. So we work with a whole bunch of restaurants around the country to do koji. Who are far more talented than myself. It's wild to see what they do with this stuff. And really the opportunities are limitless. But that certainly all comes back to, how important that is as the base of the sake ferment, and how much derivation there can be in style just based on the style of koji.
Mm-hmm.
So you're both kind of producing very different styles of sake. Byron, you're really going for kind of an older style sake, as far as I can tell. And Andrew, you're really kind of pushing the outer limits of what sake can be in North America. So it kind of leads me to this question of, where do you see the North American sake industry at this moment in time? Do you see it really pushing towards kind of a closer relationship to Japanese sake, or are you trying to push the boundaries to be more an American style sake? And how do you think about that as you brew sake?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the hope is that I can give something back to a beverage that's given me so much. And for that reason, anytime I can highlight Japanese sake, especially some of these lesser known styles, that's what I would like to do. So for that reason, I'm constantly trying to help importers, perhaps even import ourselves, especially things that inform what we're doing, but also, lift the ships that are all sailing the sake sea at this point. Of course, it's no secret that Japanese sales have declined over the past stretch. And if we can do anything to help keep this beverage vibrant and expanding culturally, I think that's part of the mission as well. I mean, you have seen pretty substantial upticks in sales in the States and in Europe, and hopefully we can keep that trend going. Whether that is American sake or Japanese sake, I don't think it has to be one or the other.
Yeah, I think we're at a really cool moment in sake right now in America. There are a lot of increased sales happening right now, and a lot of increased interest in sake. And I think that this kind of like nice combo that we have, which is, I think Japanese sake brewers are really interested in what's happening in the U.S. And that's mixed with this kind of grassroots sake brewery sake breweries starting to pop up across the country. And I think that's a mix of people finally getting more adventurous in what they're looking at and taking sake as more than just something you have at a sushi restaurant, and realizing what it really is. And I think the exciting part is that what the American brewers kind of bring to the table is this opportunity to educate people closer to where they are. So for us, for example, in Charlottesville, we have an awesome opportunity to bring people into our brewery, to line up a flight where they can get a cloudy or junmai or a daiginjo, and then look at our koji room and see the brewery and see what it takes to make it happen. And it kind of clicks a light on in their head that maybe they never thought of sake. I've actually had a few people who come into our place and said, I've never thought once about how sake was actually made. And so I think that's kind of what's cool is happening in the US right now, is this really cool craft driven movement around beer and wine and cider. And quite naturally, this kind of sake is a piece of that. And I think that's what's cool about this opportunity to kind of show people that.
Yeah.
And in terms of style, I think, the sake brewers of America and North America at least this is how I feel. I think we're young. We're in this young stage where, honestly, I'm trying to still figure a lot of things out. And so everything right now is an experiment at this point. I don't know if I'm necessarily ready to be like, I'm going to do this specific style yet. I still haven't done a lot of styles yet. I've never even tried a Yamahai. So it's one of those things where it's like, I feel like I'm building slowly, but building towards new styles while trying to really hone my craft in on kind of our two flagships. And then what's nice is that I guess kind of my home brew roots of it is that I'm still trying to do some experimentation. And so that's kind of my mentality is kind of twofold. It's like on one side, I want to make great traditional sakes and great style-based sakes, and I'm really working hard on that. And then the other side is this piece of my mind where I'm like trying to look at how craft trends are going in the US and seeing, we have a beer brewery that's literally right above our brewery. We have cideries down the street that are doing crazy collaborations. And so every day I'm seeing these really interesting kind of takes on fermentation and talking to other adjacent industries. And I think that's where a cool opportunity is to kind of mix it up a little bit and see where it lands. That's kind of where I kind of see at least our efforts. And I think that across the US and with a number of sake breweries that are hopefully starting to pop up and open up, I think you're going to see the same kind of thing, which is like an easing into, making great sake, because we need to have like a great baseline of sake out there made in the US. But then I think you'll see these kind of divergent brewers kind of doing really interesting things, whether that's on that super traditional stylistic side or something completely new.
Byron, what do you think is the hardest thing for consumers? I mean, earlier you said something I thought was kind of interesting. You said some Americans are just missing the point on sake. Like, where do you think the challenges lie with American consumers, or even just international consumers in general, and sake?
Yeah, I think there's certainly a lack of information out there, which hopefully we can help alleviate. And certainly there is a lack of diversity in the market, especially in the South, for Japanese sakes, which again, hopefully we can make part of our mission. And I think, at least I tell myself when I'm looking back at previous beverage styles, things that have taken, decades to come to fruition, like American wine, or even craft beer in general. What was the timeline for that? How long did it take? Obviously, those are synonymous with American food and beverage at this point, but at one point in time, that wasn't a thing. So certainly finding a way and a home for that education and for that diversity of product to get out there. I think one leg up that we have in the sake industry is just that there's no shortage of interest in Japanese cuisine at the moment. And I hope that we can figure out how to ride that wave most effectively. So, every small town in America has a sushi restaurant. You're seeing ramen and izakaya spots pop up everywhere, and then even more, niche subsects of Japanese cuisine. So certainly having that as an education touch point has been really important. And then, like Andrew was saying, I think the more of us that open, obviously, the more visibility we get. Hopefully, we have people pushing the boundaries while also affording people the opportunity to taste some more traditional styles. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just interesting because I think about my journey a lot around sake, and having the opportunity to go to Japan and taste world class, the best sakes in the world is not something everyone gets the chance to do. And I think that's kind of the challenge, and the hard part is that most people, it has some really difficult barriers to entry. Like you think about going to a lot of Japanese restaurants, and you'll see a sake list that sometimes is actually quite phenomenal. But because there are certain terms that are hard to understand, that they've never seen before, never heard before, you kind of go down to like a price point almost thing, and you kind of like, oh, this is the one that I think I'm willing to kind of take a leap on. And without any of that contextual piece of it, you could be getting a sake that is really nice, but it's super dry. And maybe you don't like dry sake. And maybe another time you get one that's super sweet, and you're like, I don't like sweet things in general. And so you might write off sake as a whole based on a really limited experience. And I think that's kind of the challenge is, how do you show people the beauty and richness of all of the context around it, and all these different styles and all these different pieces of it, regionality and all of that. And when you really have only this very limited moment to do so. And that's, to me, the biggest challenge. And that's why I think it's exciting to see these breweries pop up, because I love that people come here and kind of, they twist their mind a little bit about what they maybe thought sake was. And then, hopefully that will drive them to go to the grocery store, go to a bottle shop and pick something up and take a risk on it. Because I've heard that from a lot of people, and just anecdotally, like in terms of sales of sake in general, since we've opened, most of the grocery stores and bottle shops have told us they've had an uptick in sake sales. And so it's kind of like, maybe they're getting curious about it here, and then going out and starting that journey of like, I'm going to grab this bottle because I've never seen it before, and taste it and think about it for a little while, and then maybe start to get your palate acclimated to it.
Yeah. Just to put some numbers behind what you're saying, anecdotally, there's a lot of people out there setting up sake breweries. We know personally of over 12 people around the country right now who are setting up sake breweries in all different parts of the country. And that's just in the United States. And there's dozens more around the world who are doing this. So sake is really having this moment in the spotlight. Andrew, you mentioned Japan quite a bit. What has been the relationship between Japanese sake breweries and your sake brewery, or even Japan in general? Has there been sort of an interesting relationship development since you started brewing sake?
Yeah, definitely. We've had the opportunity to work closely with a brewery called Diamond Shuzo. It's a sixth generation sake brewery that I've been able to spend some time there. And it's been really wonderful to build that aspect of this company and this brewery out, because that was always kind of the dream too, is like, you open a sake brewery, you want to have that kind of international relationship and chance to go to another country and try to explore and be a part of that culture. So that's been really, really fulfilling. And I think that what I have found to be really exciting is just the amount of kind of joy and amount they've kind of embraced us and said, it's really cool what you're doing, and we really see this as an extension of what we do. this kind of opportunity to take our culture and see it kind of flourish in another place. So that's been a really, really exciting part of our journey. And every chance I get, I want to get back to Japan. So.
Yeah, it seems like the Japanese have really embraced most of the U.S. sake breweries, or most of the international sake breweries. Byron, I don't know have you had a whole lot of interaction with the Japanese sake breweries as well, or is that something that you're kind of exploring down the road?
Yeah, I mean, that was a slow road to go down. Certainly when you're getting into it and you don't have any assets to show, people don't take you very seriously, especially when you don't speak the language. So I'm excited to see how things continue to evolve. Have certainly come across more breweries as we've gotten into this who've been interested in facilitating our education. So certainly having organizations like, the Brewers Association, having a cohesive voice to reach out to people has been really helpful. Yeah, it's just an exploration, and certainly, finally getting to see some of these smaller, more esoteric breweries has certainly informed the way that I think about it. For instance, last year I finally got to go visit Philip Harperson at Tamagawa. I think that's one of those brands that if anybody who's never tasted sake or has only had hot commodity sake before tastes his stuff, I think they turn the corner immediately.
Yeah, Tamagawa Red Label is one of those sakes that just sort of blows people's minds. Yeah.
It doesn't taste like anything else that's available in the States typically.
Yeah. So there's some interesting kind of data that we keep pulling out that we're really interested in. So a lot of people don't know that sake has been imported to the U.S. since February of 1856. And there's actually been sake breweries operating on U.S. soil since about June 1901. So it's been around for a long time. It's over 160 years of sake history here in the United States. In your own views, how do you see the industry growing? Where do we go from here? We've got 20-ish sake breweries, slightly more that are coming online soon that are producing sake here in the United States. But where do you see the industry in 20, 30 years? Where would you like to see the industry in 20 years?
I mean, obviously, I would love to see it grow to be huge. But what I think is interesting just about kind of my take on kind of what's happening right now in kind of the craft alcohol scene is this movement towards local and almost like hyper-local beverage. This idea that almost every town that I know of has at least one craft beer brewery, if not a cidery, maybe a distiller. And I just find that it's kind of interesting to kind of mirror that to the idea of jizaki or local sake in Japan, where you go to a town and they've got some serious town pride in their local sake breweries. And so I think that's kind of just a cool anecdote. But I feel like at this moment, what will hopefully happen is that you'll have these, that every state will have at least one sake brewery, and that will be kind of a hub for people to learn about and experiment and talk about sake and be a part of that sake world. And then I think depending on the interest, which I think is definitely there, that I've seen through just the people that walk through our door and then our outside sales as well, sky kind of feels like it's the limit on what it could be. But I think for that to happen, you need a couple of things, which is we need more sake brewers. We need more resources and education around it. And I think we need to make sure we're making great sake here in the States. And to do that, I think it's having conversations like this and having more resources available that we can learn, that we can feel confident in what we're doing, and then push kind of the limits and show people as much as we can the beauty of this beverage.
Yeah, I think to that end, it would be pretty hard for us to totally blow this, just considering the foundation of Japanese culture and interests that we already have in the States. So yeah, hopefully we continue to grow this particular beverage in a way that does it justice, doesn't make it a flash in the pan, and makes it a household beverage, that everyone has one bottle of in the fridge or somewhere in their pantry. Every bar has, a well sake that they're making cocktails with, and then, a nice selection of just straight pours. I think we're headed in that direction, but it's going to take some time. And certainly a mission for us is getting on wine lists in non-Japanese restaurants, which can be like pulling teeth, but when it happens, people immediately say, aha. And it's just like cider. You start to see cider in the same format. I think they were probably dealing with the same thing we were 5-6 years ago. So I think it can be done. And certainly in 20, 30 years, hopefully this is just a silly conversation. People will think that we're crazy for even thinking that sake wasn't the most important beverage in the world.
Byron, yeah, I mean, my conversations are silly conversations.
Well, I think that's kind of the thing is like, we talk about this a lot at North American Sake Brewery. I drink all kinds of different beverage, whether I'll have beers and IPAs, I'll have ciders, I'll have wine. And it's not like anyone's just going to just switch over to just drinking sake. And to me, it's finding that it's part of my rotation. Like, we want people to think of it just like Byron said. It's like, yeah, you got a bottle of it in your fridge, and when the moment strikes and you have it right there to have some. Because there are some nights where I'm like, you know what, I just want a beer. But then there are some nights where it's like, I gotta get some sake. And I think most people just don't, it's not even on their radar in that way. It is more like, let's go to the sushi restaurant. Oh yeah, now that I'm here, I'm going to have some sake.
I think that's part of the education touchstone as well. Making sure people understand they can drink sake very amenably with pizza and burgers and, anything on the grill. So that's certainly a good jumping off point.
Yeah. Cool. Well, guys, it's been 30 minutes. We need to wrap this up. I really appreciate both of your time. I know you've got breweries that you're running. You're busy guys. Thank you again, Andrew Centofonte, head brewer of North American Sake Brewery, and Byron Sitham, head brewer of Proper Sake in Nashville, Tennessee. Guys, it's been a real pleasure. For those who are watching, this is going to be recorded and put onto sakeassociation.org, which is our website. We have lots more information about sake, the Sake Brewers Association. And so if you're interested, head there. I know some of you have asked questions. Hopefully on the future webinars, we'll start to take questions and get to those. But I really, really appreciate your time, and enjoy sake. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.